Section 1. You will hear two friends, Nancy and Fiona, catching up with each other. First, you will have some time to look at questions 1 to 6. You will see that there is an example which has been done for you. On this occasion only, the conversation relating to this will be repeated.
Hello, Fiona. I haven't seen you for ages.
Hi, Nancy. It must be 2 years, I think.
Has it been that long? It seems like yesterday that we were regularly catching up with each other on Friday mornings at that cafe around the corner from you.
It has been 2 years since Nancy has seen Fiona, so you circle B, 2 years. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 6.
Hello, Fiona. I haven't seen you for ages.
Hi, Nancy. It must be 2 years, I think.
Has it been that long? It seems like yesterday that we were regularly catching up with each other on Friday mornings at that cafe around the corner from you.
Yes, I remember our chats at Cafe Bellissimo over a nice hot coffee and cake. Do you still work part-time or are you busier now?
Well, actually, since I saw you last, I've had a baby girl who's with her grandmother at the moment, so I'm free to pay bills and do grocery shopping. What about yourself? What are you up to these days?
Well, actually, I've started my own business, so I'm pretty busy. I'd call it full-time work myself, although the hours are very flexible.
Wow, that sounds really fascinating. What sort of business is it?
Well, we were initially going to open a shop, but we thought it would be easier to sell our product online. And a market stall would have been too hard to manage. We also thought it would be a great idea to sell not just in Perth, but all over Australia as well.
So what do you sell?
We're selling children's costumes from around the world.
Interesting. How did you come up with the idea?
As you know, Perth is such a multicultural society. At my children's school, there are so many immigrant children. Many of the families find it difficult to get traditional things from their culture, including clothes for special celebrations. With our extensive business travelling over the years, we have made numerous contacts in many countries.
You now have 20 seconds to look at questions 7 to 10. Now answer questions 7 to 10.
So how many countries' costumes do you sell?
At the moment, I have a good range of countries. I have access to 10 from Africa and similarly from Asia with 10 nationalities. I have slightly more from the Americas with 13 and more again from Europe with 25. Unfortunately, I only have 6 for the Pacific region, but I'm expanding all the time.
When do you find time to run your business?
Well, that's the problem at the moment. I have so many things to organise, but I don't have enough time to do everything.
Do you see an accountant or do you do your tax yourself?
I get all of my receipts and expenses together, but then I go to an accountant who fills in my tax return as it takes me too much time.
What about your website? You said that your company's growing all the time.
Yes, it's true that my website continually needs to be updated, but it only takes me a short time each week to do it. So that is one area I can manage myself.
Do you advertise your business anywhere? Where do your customers come from?
It's interesting you should ask. Most of my business is word of mouth, but I do hand out a lot of business cards. I get them done by the local printer, although I must admit that they are rather plain. I need to add a little colour when I get time to redesign them in the future.
Well, it's been great catching up with you and finding out all about your business. I'm very interested in looking at your website when I get home.
Here's my business card so that you can email me for our next get-together. Don't bother about a babysitter next time. Bring your daughter with you as I'd love to meet her.
That sounds like a great idea. See you soon.
Goodbye.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 2. Section 2. You will hear a speech to a group of volunteers preparing for a town's anniversary celebrations. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
And now for the preparation plans for the town's 250th anniversary celebrations. We are going to follow the same system we had last year, but with a few changes to increase the party spirit. First of all, this time we are going to make the concert on the beach open to everyone without charge. This is because we have been given money by the council for the celebration, and also because last year we had so many problems with keeping people out who had not paid. And on top of this, people will not have to pay for refreshments either, as these are being donated. Right now, we are going to divide into 4 teams. The first one, the beach team, will be responsible for cleaning up the beach on the Saturday morning, picking up litter, bottles, plastic bags, wood, and anything else that's lying around. Everyone is meeting at the beach shop at 8 a.m. It's an early start, but we want to give everywhere a good thorough clean. We have had permission from the council to close the beach to get it ready for the anniversary celebration on Sunday. The second team will be responsible for setting out seating in the square for the speeches and prize giving. Again, an early start is preferable, but the vans with the seats can't be there until 9 a.m. So, shall we say that everyone should meet at the village hall at 9:30? Starting then will allow extra time if the vans are late.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20. Now listen carefully and answer questions 16 to 20.
Now, the third team will be the judges. For each of the various competitions, we will have 3 judges. On the whole, they will have had experience of judging before. There will be a boat race, a swimming competition, and the best fancy dress. A cash prize will be given to the winner in each category, and for the 2 runners-up, there will be book tokens. There is a sponsored mini-marathon, and by the deadline, lunchtime today, we had 263 applicants, with ages ranging from 15 to 60. That's 80 more than last year. Each entrant has paid a £20 registration fee to enter, and all the profits will go to the local children's hospital to help fund much-needed specialist apparatus. The 4th team consists of the wardens for the day itself. We are expecting at least 10,000 people, if last year is anything to go by. The fields near the entrance to the beach can be used as car parks, and we need wardens to help make sure the actual parking is more organised than last year, which was a mess. We also need someone to be in charge of the first aid, which will be at the entrance to the beach. Finally, we need some volunteers for the clean-up. Last year we didn't do this very well, and so the council has agreed to provide large bags to collect all the recyclable material like glass and plastic, etc. But we have to deal with the rest, like leftover food, ourselves. We don't want to leave piles of rotten food around or dangerous bottles.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 3. Section 3. You will hear two students, Dylan and Emily, discussing a presentation which they will have to make. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 24. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 24.
OK, Emily, as you know, we've got to do this presentation together.
I know. I'm a little bit nervous about it. Standing up in front of all those people. And what if the presentation fails? What if...
Don't worry. I've been reading a book about giving effective presentations. It's not that hard, but the way to do it is certainly not always obvious either. For example, do you know what the most important part of a presentation is?
The final summary, I guess.
The opposite. The first minute, in fact. The theory says that first minute is when you win or lose the audience. If you lose them at that point, you'll probably never get them back. So that's why you need a hook.
A hook? You mean like when you catch fish?
Yes. I mean, not exactly, but yes, we want to catch the audience, right? So we need to start in a way which wakes them up, gets them interested, and makes them watch us.
I see.
Basically, no matter how good our presentation is, if the message doesn't get across, the presentation fails. So we need to give a fact which really amazes them, or an interesting story, or pose a dilemma which makes them think, something they can really puzzle over. It's better if this is related to the subject, of course. Something to do with management, in our case.
So that's the hook?
That's right. From then on, we'll just follow the basic advice.
Like what?
Like, talk to your audience, as equals. Don't talk down to them, or up to them. They're just the same as us, right?
You're right, Some of the best presentations I've ever seen sounded just like conversations.
Exactly. And what else made them good?
Well, the speakers sort of involved me in the topic and issues under discussion by asking questions, by referring to me, by saying you, and, well, basically they were interesting.
And they're exactly the tips we'll follow too. It should be fine.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 25 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 25 to 30.
Emily, I think this will be a fine presentation, but how are we going to divide it up? For example, who's going to open it, you or me?
Well, I think you have a very natural style, so you should start. This talk has 5 main parts, so you can introduce it and then do part 1.
That's the historical context or background to the issue.
Yes, then I'll do part 2 about current views. You do part 3 and I'll do part 4, leaving both of us to handle the question time.
I'm okay with that. In part 1, I'll probably speak at length about Hoffman's theory, about management styles, and compare differences in culture in relation to the style of management used.
That sounds good. Those differences are important and certainly relevant to the current times. Hoffman makes some excellent points too on this issue. That's why I'll follow up with present-day perspectives and viewpoints on this, such as the problems facing today's managers in the complex multicultural workplace, where basically one can no longer assume one is dealing with a single culture in the workplace, but actually a multiculture.
That sounds good also. Then I'll take over, discussing the implications and problems of this.
I suppose you'll look at the pluralist movement.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but then I changed my mind. I've decided I'll look at the productive diversity argument. It's more interesting anyway, so I'll go with that.
Then I'll tell everyone what we've decided is the best business practice, or what is most likely to work in most situations, which is basically ignoring pluralism and productive diversity and linking everything back to Kotter's theory of human universals.
Yes, the theory that argues modern management should target the universals of human nature. Right, and that leaves both of us to field questions at the end.
Are there any questions we can predict so that we have some good answers ready? About resolving industrial disputes, for example?
Well, I'd say that industrial democracy usually surprises people, so we should expect a lot of questions about that.
Yes, the theory is that it increases productivity and reduces industrial delays.
And results in better decision-making, but that's all theory. Most people would think that industrial democracy is just about unworkable in practice, so let's be ready to explore that issue in some depth, as well as any other related topics, okay?
Okay.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 4 on page 44. Section 4. You will hear a part of a lecture about learning and bilingualism. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40 on pages 44 and 45. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
When we look at theories of education and learning, we see a constant shifting of views as established theories are questioned and refined or even replaced, and we can see this very clearly in the way that attitudes towards bilingualism have changed. Let's start with a definition of bilingualism. And for our purposes today, we can say it's the ability to communicate with the same degree of proficiency in at least 2 languages. Now, in practical terms, this might seem like a good thing, something we'd all like to be able to do. However, early research done with children in the USA in fact suggested that being bilingual interfered in some way with learning and with the development of their mental processes. And so in those days, bilingualism was regarded as something to be avoided, and parents were encouraged to bring their children up as monolingual, just speaking one language. But this research, which took place in the early part of the 20th century, is now regarded as unsound for various reasons, mainly because it didn't take into account other factors such as the children's social and economic backgrounds. Now, in our last lecture, we were looking at some of the research that's been done into the way children learn, into their cognitive development, and in fact we believe now that the relationship between bilingualism and cognitive development is actually a positive one. It turns out that cognitive skills such as problem solving, which don't seem at first glance to have anything to do with how many languages you speak, are better among bilingual children than monolingual ones. And quite recently, there's been some very interesting work done by Ellen Bialystok at York University in Canada. She's been doing various studies on the effects of bilingualism, and her findings provide some evidence that they might apply to adults as well. They're not just restricted to children. So how do you go about investigating something like this? Well, Dr. Bialystok used groups of monolingual and bilingual subjects aged from 30 right up to 88. For one experiment, she used a computer program which displayed either a red or a blue square on the screen. The coloured square could come up on either the left-hand or the right-hand side of the screen. If the square was blue, the subject had to press the left Shift key on the keyboard, and if the square was red, they had to press the right Shift key. So they didn't have to react at all to the actual position of the square on the screen, just to the colour they saw. And she measured the subjects' reaction times by recording how long it took them to press the Shift key and how often they got it right. What she was particularly interested in was whether it took the subject longer to react when a square lit up on one side of the screen, say the left, and the subject had to press the Shift key on the right-hand side. She'd expected that it would take more processing time than if a square lit up on the left and the candidates had to press a left key. This was because of a phenomenon known as the Simon effect, where basically the brain gets a bit confused because of conflicting demands being made on it. In this case, seeing something on the right and having to react on the left. And this causes a person's reaction times to slow down. The results of the experiment showed that the bilingual subjects responded more quickly than the monolingual ones. That was true both when the squares were on the correct side of the screen, so to speak, and even more so when they were not. So bilingual people were better able to deal with the Simon effect than the monolingual ones. So what's the explanation for this? Well, the result of the experiment suggests that bilingual people are better at ignoring information which is irrelevant to the task in hand and just concentrating on what's important. One suggestion given by Dr. Bialystok was that it might be because someone who speaks two languages can suppress the activity of parts of the brain when it isn't needed. In particular, the part that processes whichever language isn't being used at that particular time. Well, she then went on to investigate that with a second experiment. But again, the bilingual group performed better. And what was particularly interesting, and this is, I think, why the experiments have received so much publicity, is that in all cases, the performance gap between monolinguals and bilinguals actually increased with age, which suggests that bilingualism protects the mind against decline. So, in some way, the lifelong experience of managing two languages may prevent some of the negative effects of ageing. So that's a very different story from the early research. So what are the implications of this for education?
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.